Hi guys, Ian Johnson from driversuccess.com. Today we're going to talk about pricing a product or an industrial finished good as a manufacturer. Now ideally what you want is you want to be able to have an MRP system or an ERP system, an ability to track work orders, material allocation, track cycle time variances, analyze production throughput from various work cells and workstations. But you know, the reality is not every company has that tool. So what I've done today is I basically put up a pricing sheet that's available on my website at driversuccess.com, and later on in the video you'll be able to click on a link that'll allow you to use this exact same Excel spreadsheet. And what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to basically go over the four aspects of the Excel spreadsheet, accounting for material, labor, overhead, and then defining the price. Okay, so I'm going to go through each portion of the Excel spreadsheet, and when that link comes up later on and you click on it, you'll be able to input your material, your quantity, your cost, and this panel right here will do the calculation for you, as will this panel right here on the labor portion. And there's some other areas where you've got to input some values, but I'll define that as we go forward. So very quickly, material. What we're doing in this case is we're accounting for the material to make one unit. In this case, the company's using aluminum, steel, they're silver plating the aluminum. They're using magnets, epoxy, and ferrites. And this is the quantity for each unit manufactured. 10 magnets, one, I say epoxy, it's basically a glue, so this is one little dab of glue, I guess you could say. And then ferrites here. So cost per material, $150, $270, $200, $10 for each magnet, $2 for the epoxy, $5 for the ferrites. So very quickly, the total is 1 times 150, 150, 270, 1 times 270, 1 times 200, 200, 10 times 10 to 100. So these are the totals right here. Now, what I've done in this case, and what I do a lot of times, is I actually apply a 5% indirect cost to managing inventory. Now, this is something that I learned several years ago when I was working at a company. And when you think about the cost of inventory, and I've done a couple of videos on this, the cost to carry inventory is typically 3% of the inventory value on hand. That accounts for financing, cost of capital, cost of obsolescence, damage, handling, counting, pilferage, theft, all kinds of stuff go into that cost. So you can drop it down to 3% if you need be, but you should charge a cost to manage these raw materials. So in this case it's 5%, which is $36.60. So it's basically 5% of this total. So the $36.60 is then added to the total of this, and it gives you total material cost of $7.86. So fairly straightforward. Account for your material per unit manufactured. Okay? Now we're going to move over to the labor portion. Now, what I think is very important when you look at labor is to account for your setup times in manufacturing. Now, a lot of companies tend to ignore their setup times. They really pay attention to their setup times for individual operations and individual workstations when it's low volume, because low volume, you've got to account for your setup times because it's a large portion of the overall cost. But in reality, you should account for your setup times regardless of the volume. Yeah, if you have a high volume of units manufactured, your setup time is going to be spread out over that large volume, but you should still account for it. So the Excel spreadsheet will actually do the calculation for you. So I'll run through basically the operations that are needed. The setup time and the run time are in minutes. The cost per hour is allocated to each operation in terms of a labor rate for each operation. So you got cutting, machining, CNC, welding, and labeling. Setup time 10, 10, 10, 10, and 2. Run time 35 minutes, 55 minutes, 125 minutes for CNC, 45, 45. Again, this is an example, so they're don't take these at face value, okay? And then I've got the cost per hour. So $20 in cutting, $12 in CNC machining. In machining, $17 in CNC, $12 in welding, and $17 in labor. Now, the way the sample Excel spreadsheet is going to calculate this portion of the formula, it's going to take your setup time divided by 60 minutes, multiplied by your cost per hour in terms of a labor rate, and it's going to add that to the 35 minutes on the run time divided by 60 minutes, multiplied by the cost per hour. So that's how it accounts for the setup time and the run time in the overall total labor cost for this individual operation. So it'll do that for each one of the operations. It'll repeat the process, and it'll give you a total down here labor rate of $186.46. Okay? Now you have to account for overhead. and I've done a couple of videos in the past. Again, I'll just bring it up. Overhead is your indirect expenses divided by your direct expenses. And if you want an example of direct expenses are direct material and direct labor. Okay? So basically, direct expenses are billable to a particular customer, or they are direct costs to a particular product that you're manufacturing. Indirect expenses relate to ancillary support costs in terms of administration, sales, accounting, these type of things. These are costs that you can't directly link to a particular product or service or bill it to a customer, but they're costs you have to cover nonetheless. Okay? So we're down here at overhead, and in this case, the company's overhead is 30%. And what's happening in this case is we're going to add the labor here and the total, the material here and the total labor here, and we're going to multiply that by 30%. And when we add 186 to 786 and multiply it by 30%, we get 286. So I've written a little note here. This is material plus labor times 30%. So the subtotal is 1,241. That includes total labor here, total material, total labor here of 186, and the overhead cost of 30%. So it's 1, 2, 3 gives you 1241.58. In this particular case, the company wants to make 25% profit, so you take 1241.58 divided it by 0.75. It gives you a sell price of 1,655.44. Again, the link is probably just popped up above my head. This link will allow you to use this very same sample Excel spreadsheet. You'll be able to input your quantities, your cost, your materials. You'll be able to account for the different operations you do. Make sure you account for setup times. Make sure you have an accurate runtime. It'll allow you to account for your cost per hour. It'll figure out the material cost, the 5%. It'll do it on its own. It'll figure out the labor costs. It'll add up everything for you. You have to input your overhead rate, and then you have to determine what kind of profit you want to do. So if it's 30%, it would be 0.7. If it's 40%, it would be divided by 0.6. So this is a great tool for companies that don't have that MRP system or ERP system. It's very simple, very easy to use. And once again, it's available on my website. So check it out. Take care. Ian Johnson, DriveSuccess.com. Bye-bye.